Okay, welcome to the Stellify podcast. Always excited, but my guest tonight is someone who has been quietly but powerfully rethreading the forgotten patterns of our world. Michelle Gibson is a historical researcher, a geomantic decoder who has spent years uncovering the buried truths of our ancient infrastructure, sacred geometry, and the vast global network of star forts, ley lines, and mud flood architecture. Her work explores the veil that's been drawn over humanity's true history, and she does it by mapping the anomalies that surround us all in plain sight. From hidden timelines to energetic grids, Michelle helps people see what's always been there, and once the false narrative begins to crumble. In this podcast, we're going to journey through this layered reality and ask the deeper question: what kind of world were we actually born into, and what power still runs beneath our feet? Michelle, thank you for joining me for this chat. Truly honoured. Your work is extensive and incredible. I've not come across work quite like it. I'll be honest, the depth you must spend forever now. It must be your life completely, the amount of work you put out there. And I want to thank you, first of all, for what you're doing, because it's so important. Could you tell me what kind of led you to begin questioning the official historical narrative, and what kind of cracked it open for you initially? What did it?
I've always had a curiosity about hidden history. I was born in '63, and when I was growing up, there just wasn't a whole lot, and I liked history in school, so I was pretty well versed in what they teach us. But I liked shows that delved into the mysteries. And so books that I remember, not necessarily reading, but I remember from when I was growing up would be like Chariots of the Gods. It was kind of an early one. I liked Unsolved Mysteries on television. I liked Leonard Nimoy hosted a series called In Search of.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, I never really got into ancient aliens, but I haven't watched television in a long time, so that came later. And the thing I like about Ancient Aliens is that it's getting stuff out to the mainstream in a way that where it's not, if they said ancient humans, it would not have lasted. It would have been taken off the air a long time ago. So they
Yeah,
couch it in terms of aliens, and okay, well, that's good. We can talk about this stuff as
yeah.
aliens. But the reality is there was a highly advanced worldwide civilization here on Earth.
Hmm.
It's like Atlantis, what we learn about as Atlantis, but existed from ancient times to modern times. And and you can find the evidence. I found it in sacred geometry and ley lines, and I
Mm-hmm.
learned about the Moors. And those three things were the starting point for me when I started doing my own original research in 2018.
Right.
But I would say probably for the 5 to 10 years prior to that, I started to awaken to the stream of information specifically that I'm bringing in. And by that time, there was a lot more available, especially on the internet. Like
Mm-hmm.
I said, when I was a kid, there just wasn't that much. But they gave us the internet, thank God, because that's really, really what's done the trick for humanity. Because if they hadn't done that, they would have
Yeah, I
gotten away
agree.
with it. No question. They had the narrative sewn up, and they educated us in it and reinforced it in movies and books, and they would have gotten away with it. But because the internet was brought in, and even though originally it was brought in as a control mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
they needed it too. And then we've been able to use it not only to connect with each other like this, but also to do our own research. And just because of the way
Yeah.
the internet is constructed, it's associative. So it'll pull in all kinds of related information. If you're looking at one subject, it'll say, well, people that like that like this, and that brings in even more. And so it's really what has allowed us to do our own research, ask our own questions. Like I would not be here talking to you if I didn't have the ability to do my own research.
Yeah.
You can find things in your backyard or in your own community, but my work, especially on ley lines, has taken me across the earth. And
Yeah.
so I've seen the same things, same hand of design all over the earth. And so there was one worldwide civilization, and it gets confusing because of what was done to hide this civilization from us, which was basically, first of all, I think it was destroyed
Right.
there was a highly advanced energy grid. So when people
Right.
talk about Tartaria and Antiquitech and these beautiful buildings and mud flood and all that stuff, that's pertaining to this event that we know nothing about. And my opinion is that it was deliberately caused,
Hmm.
and that the world we see today was completely different prior to this event. I think the destruction of the energy grid caused what we see with the oceans and the seas and the lakes and all that stuff. That's where my work is taking me. And when I started tracking ley lines years ago, and ley lines that I found, um, it would, I would look at it, but not with the level of understanding that I have now.
Mm.
And the level of understanding I have now takes me so much deeper because I add more to it. So even when I go back to series that I've done years ago, I'll start to update it, and it just takes me
Yeah.
forever because I have to add to it.
I bet.
And so one of the things that kind of came in the in between was learning about ancient giant trees
Okay.
and what that means, because we don't see those, right?
No.
What happened to them. And so you add that in, and then you get this picture of this energy grid and how the energy grid was constructed with the rail infrastructure, which was pre-existing, all of it, streetcars and trains and underground. It was all pre-existing. And that like kind of falls out when you look at this land that's been ruined. We call them swamps and wetlands and marshes,
Hmm.
and they have rail history. And our narrative says, oh, we built this in the 1850s through the swamp or whatever. Get out of here. It's BS. But that's the story. That's the best
Yeah.
they got.
Yeah.
And they got away with it because they repeated it over and over and over and over again. And they did the groundwork, they did the blueprints, the draftsmanship, and all this stuff. We built this, we built this, we built this.
And you think is when nobody's connected enough, like you said, the internet's so good for that because you're connected to people and information. Whereas, like if you're going through school and in through your indoctrination camps as you do, you're taught the books, aren't you? And you don't question it. You're taught not to question history anyway. So it's important that this is happening right now. And yeah, your work's incredible.
And not just history, but science.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
Newton's work is predicated on a spinning Earth. Now, I didn't start out having an opinion,
yeah.
but as I was tracking ley lines, I encountered all this evidence to support that's not what they tell us. The shape of the Earth is not what they tell us with maps and all these other things. And so, if you start to accept we don't live on a spinning planet,
Hmm.
and what does that leave? So you've got, you hear flat Earth,
Hmm.
but my work is based on sacred geometry,
Yeah,
and the shape of a torus
yeah, 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 yeah,
is fundamental to that. And so I'm okay with it being like a torus with the energy cycling, like us.
yeah, yeah.
We have
The
toruses around
torus
us,
field. Yeah,
and our energy flow, you know, be breathe chronically, you get your energy flow going. And our light body is a hologram of the earth and the universe. It's the same
makes
shape.
sense. Y- Yeah,
And so Newton's gravity thing is based on the planet spinning around the sun. That's a lot right there.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Their whole
Mm.
science. was engineered to support this new world that they brought us on the ruins of the old world, because that's what we're living on. We don't even know we're on top of this advanced civilization because of all the lies that have been told. And unfortunately, well, first of all, thankfully we're waking up, but unfortunately, we're the prize. Energy is the prize. Not only our energy, but the energy of this grid that they're harvesting. So they're harvesting our energy and they're harvesting the grid energy. They don't give a flip about us.
No, they don't.
We're nothing to them except an energy source.
Yeah, the
And,
battery.
in some cases, we're not the top of the food chain.
No,
And
we're not.
that's and that's the most politically correct way to put it. They harvest us. And
Yeah,
in order to do that, they have to have our consent, because we're sovereign beings in a free will place. So we have
yeah,
to, if we're going to follow them, we have to give our consent to do that, which we would not do if we knew what was really going on here.
yeah. Hence the manipulation and the lies.
Right.
Yeah,
And we're living in a time where all this is coming down, but there's still a lot of resistance because they got in everything. So, we've got stuff playing out in the world today where it's abundantly clear, especially on
absolutely.
your side of the pond, that there's major problems with our governments
Oh gosh, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
what's
yeah.
been going on with that and what's been covered up with that. It's brutal. The people
It
that are
is.
the truth tellers are the pushback that's happening to people that are drawing the line in the sand, standing their ground. And it's horrible what's been going
Mm.
on. And, very aware that censorship issues. So, I think read between the lines of what I'm saying, but that's what it is. They don't care that we have a belief, but they don't give us truth to form those beliefs with. So instead, they leave us arguing with ourselves, each
Mm,
other, with this
mhm.
false information, with the human need to know and maybe even be right. And that's one of the
Absolutely.
biggest things we have to deal with is our
Yes.
own ego.
The cognitive dissonance that appears it's been profoundly appearing since, especially since 2020, with the narratives that were coming out, and I've come across some serious cognitive dissonance this morning, even from the missiles that landed in Iran, where it's the trust the plan situation, and everything's okay, everything's in order. But it seems to be the same script running again.
Well, we're definitely living in interesting times. And I know from the feedback that I get from my viewers in comments that people are looking for information
Yeah,
that's different from what we've been told. And I'm going to use the word trust in what I'm saying is we have to trust that there's something bigger happening here on a spiritual level. However, humanity is freed from this prison planet, or this place that's been turned into our prison
mm.
without our awareness and consent. And years ago, when I heard that term, I'm like, how can that possibly be? I'm not in prison. But everything in our world is designed to keep us down and keep us bound and keep us bound to
100%.
the system.
Yeah, 100%.
And they're stealing. They're stealing our energy. They're stealing our money. That kind of thing is coming out. Um, and so we kind of have to we do kind of have to trust, because it's not going to be an easy fix. Whatever happens from here on out is not going to be an easy fix. But one thing I say all the time in my work, and I feel deep in my heart, they're not going to get away with what they've done. The crimes against humanity and the creator and creation are just too vast.
I agree.
And if you look at the legend of Hiram Abiff, which is a Masonic ritual for third-degree Masons about the builder of Solomon's temple being killed in the temple by 3 unworthy craftsmen who, when Hiram would not give them the keys, they killed him.
Yeah.
Now, this legend also says he's going to come back. So they can't stop this higher consciousness from coming back, and they know it. That's why they've thrown everything at us. But what I'm saying is we're dealing with the unworthy craftsmen. That's what they are. They are absolute scum.
Yeah.
Absolute scum. And they're laughing at us and mocking humanity because of what they've done. And we're asleep. We don't know we're being messed with. And I'm speaking a little bit more emphatically than I normally do, but I feel very strongly about all of this what's going on.
And rightly so, because it's in your face, especially when you start seeing it. It's there in front of you, and they are taking the piss out of us, clearly, and laughing, like you say.
Yep.
And this is why your work is vastly important, because you will bring knowledge, and hopefully people that are on the cusp, even those that are just interested in ley lines, star forts, or history in itself, to come across your work, will plant a seed. There's something not adding up here, and that's important that those seeds are planted, because it might be 5-10 years down the line, they may go, we've been lied to here.
Yeah.
And that's important.
And the other exciting thing about the work that I'm doing, and again, I know this from feedback I've received, is that, it's almost, I knew when I started that I had received a key that would unlock other people's keys. And that seems to be what's happening. So there seems to be something on a vibrational level taking place, that when it resonates with other people, that it brings out maybe their gift, maybe something they're here to do. And that's one of the many reasons that they can't stop it. It's coming from the ground up. Top down has absolutely failed us, or we wouldn't be in this mess to begin with.
I think this is what, that's exactly what you're going to be saying there about YouTubes. I think this is why people like us are having these conversations now, because there's a mission placed in each of us right now to unearth what the hell's going on, who's doing it, why, and what can we do about it.
Right. And what I was going to say is it shouldn't be coming from YouTubers.
No.
It should have come from the top down to begin with.
But they're too greedy, and they're too wrapped up in their own programs. They're not connected to the soul. They're disconnected. These people are so disconnected, and they don't care.
Right. And that's been part of the programming. We have absolutely been manipulated, because in the core of true humanity, we're part of the creator directly. We're the creator having our own experience in a Gnostic kind of way. We're all having our own experience to unlock our own gnosis.
That's right.
And so that's part of why we're sovereign beings. We're the creator. They have taken that knowledge from us and replaced it with outside of us. God's outside of us. And not only that, worshiping them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So they got that energy flow, where attention goes, energy flows.
That's right.
So, we're not talking necessarily about knowledge that's completely gone. I mean, it's much more intact in the East than in the West. So in my journey through life, I was exposed to Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism. I've learned about Hinduism. These are closer to the original instructions than the organized religions that we've been given to divide us, turn us into denominations, fracture us, take us out of wholeness, and just give us garbage. They keep us in the dark and feed us garbage. And they've given us enough so that we're not aware of what we're lacking, what we don't have. And get a job, earn enough to pay rent, eat food, get your
Keep them
basic
busy.
needs
Yeah,
met.
yeah.
Oh, we're going to take taxes back. I'm sorry about that. We got to have taxes.
Yeah, yeah.
When the original world was full of abundance and creativity and energy and healing frequencies and tones, and that's how the whole thing was set up. And the remnants are still here. I think they still use aspects of the grid. Somebody knows. They've been mining it. That's what mining is. They're mining the components of the grid system, the iron ore and the gold and the silver, and it's laid out like the parts of your car. You have to have your parts of your car in a certain configuration in order for your car to run. That's the same thing with the grid system. And when they destroyed it, they knew exactly where to go. They knew about the ley lines. They kept it from us, but they knew about the ley lines. They made a beeline for getting the infrastructure up again. So that's why you see like streetcars in the 1850s being pulled by a horse or a mule. They needed, to start to get it running. And then by the 1870s, 1880s, they got it electrified. And then by the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, it was gone. They gave us, they had to develop the technology to replace that since they took it out. So that's where we get gasoline and cars and buses and all that stuff. So they kept what they needed for infrastructure. But if they didn't need it, it was gone.
It's a good way of making a lot of money out of the fossil fuels as well, though, isn't there?
Right. And
they
that gives
go
us
to war with that.
That gives them wealth that pollutes our world, and that's part of what they've been doing is environmental contamination.
Yeah.
We have to pay either buy the gas or buy the car or buy the ticket.
Yeah, keep us busy, keep us stressed.
So that so there's different aspects to this, but again, we're clueless. And I was saying before we started that I feel really believe that I was born to do this, that I incarnated to bring this information out. And I say that because there's no reason I should know any of it from my upbringing. I was born in a middle class family of teachers in Maryland. I was born outside of Washington, D.C. Nothing like this in my upbringing. But I started noticing things from when I was very young in my environment. Again, like I say, you can just go out your back door and you can start seeing this stuff if you look at it differently because it's everywhere. And so, like I said at the beginning, I've had this interest in hidden history. History was my favorite subject in school. Thank goodness I didn't major in college. I actually majored in social work because I needed to get a job quickly. I joined the Army after high school and wanted money for college, so that's why I joined the Army. And so by the time I got back to university, I was an older student, and my life story is a long one, so I won't go into that too much. But I lived in a lot of different places. I broke my patterns early when I joined the Army, and I've gotten a lot of information synchronous through synchronicities. And being in the right place at the right time, the right books, meet the right people. I had all the experiences that I needed in order to start putting this puzzle together. And the main pieces were learning about sacred geometry in the early 2000s, learning about ley lines shortly after that, and then I learned about the Moors at some point after that. And the Moors are a big missing piece to what's been going on here. They've been given about 700 years in Spain, and that's it. But this was a worldwide civilization going back to Lemuria, Moor. And it was the same civilization as Atlantis. So and this civilization existed until relatively recently, which is when the grid was destroyed. So you can find the evidence ancient times, like what we're told is natural rock formations with arches and things like that, with solstice alignments and other things, because everything was in alignment with each other. This is geometry. Everything was laid out geometrically perfectly.
Hmm.
It was perfect. The society was perfect, and I think that's because the creator was co-creating with an advanced humanity.
Right.
And I really
Right.
think Earth was like Grand Central Station for the universe, and the cathedrals and the organs and the bell towers and the bells would send out these healing frequencies from Earth to the universe. And I also think that this frequency ran the infrastructure, the trains and so forth, because if you look at, to a certain extent they still exist, but it's been mostly destroyed. The original train stations had cathedral windows.
Okay.
You see pictures of the old
Yeah.
train stations, and first of all, they're massive.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then you get into the whole airship thing,
Wow. Yeah. Of
airships
course.
being pre-existing technology. But but everything was like facing each other. So again, you find them with the old Union stations, like in the United States. Um, First of all, there's a geometric relationship between the Union Station in Cincinnati, the one in Louisville, Kentucky, and the one in Indianapolis in Indiana. If you map it out, it's in a triangle, and
Okay.
they're facing each other. They're oriented to each other, which tells me they were part of the system, and that frequency was part of it. Everything was part of this.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
attunement uh, of geometry and sound, and I just see it as truly a
It's in,
beautiful civilization.
It's incredible, isn't it? Because nothing's by chance there. It's all by design, isn't it?
Right.
They can't possibly have just, oh, we'll build that here and just by chance this is built there and lines up perfectly.
Yeah.
It's just
And
not
that's what they tell us with our history. Some guy bought some land somewhere, divided it up, sold it for $5 a piece or whatever. Pretty soon there was a city there. And that's the story. That's how flimsy it is. Oh, and then we burned down much of this. So these cities burned down,
I
and then we
know.
had to build them back better.
I know. Build back better. Oh, there's a
It's
slogan
like
for you.
it's the same people. It's
Oh, it's
exactly the same
wild.
people.
It's wild. Can I take you back a little bit to the Moors again? Because I'd never heard of the Moors until I started following your work. It's something definitely wasn't taught in school. I had no idea. First time I ever come across it was when I started listening to you. So how far back are we going again? Is it 1700 something, isn't it? Are we talking that potentially royal families were, let's say, a royal like the English royal family? You got the portraits of the royal families in the 1700s or whatever. Are we saying that's not right? Is that
Except
potentially nonsense?
I think they're fake.
Oh,
Frauds at Red Orb. So they
wow.
replaced the original families. So I've done some work on this. I think King James VI of Scotland was a real historical figure. And
Right.
there are portraits of the original King James of Scotland with melanated skin. Okay.
Oh my God.
And I think King James the First of England is a fictional character. I think our
Okay.
history is fiction up to a certain point, and certain people were used. So I don't think they rewrote it completely from scratch. I think there were real historical people that they based their new history on. I think King James
Yeah.
was one. But I
Yeah.
think King Henry the
I was
Eighth
going
is
to
a
say Henry.
complete fabrication, in my opinion.
Wow. And that's like the big one, isn't it? Henry is
Yeah.
sort of like the one that everyone talks about, especially like the kids and growing up. I remember my daughter doing work on Henry VIII and the wives and
Right. And that's the thing you think about with Henry
yeah,
the
yeah,
Eighth was the
yeah,
wives.
the wives, yeah,
And I mean, I can remember Masterpiece Theater when I was growing up, The Six Wives of Henry VIII, and watching that. But humanity was not like that humanity
Right.
was advanced. So these narratives have to be faked to give us these eras and these times, the dark ages and the filthy living conditions and all those kinds of things, because it wasn't like that.
Wow.
And so, um, like I said, I'm pretty sure that King James was based on a real character, but the history that we're taught about James is not. And not only that, it was his reign that rolled out this new world thing. So he was crowned king of both
Yeah.
in the early 1600s. It's 1603, 1604, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Within a year or two, you got the plantation of Ulster in Ireland.
Yeah.
That happened after King James I's reign began. Shortly after that, in 1606, 1607, you've got the Virginia Company of Plymouth sailing across the ocean to establish the Jamestown colony and the Plymouth colony. Same, so James is crowned England and Scotland. Then you've got the plantation of Ireland, and it's their template of you know, replacing the people that are there with their colonizing efforts
Wow.
to take over the land, to take over the culture, to bring in a new language, to kill off the
Yeah,
original
yeah,
people.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then you get the same thing in the narrative, and they're going across to North America and doing the same thing. They're colonizing and creating plantations, and from plantations you get slavery and the cash crops and the cloth. Cloth was a big deal in this. And so I really do believe at some point the narrative is fabricated, because I think something destroyed this civilization that destroyed everything,
Yeah.
and caused what is best known as the mud flood.
Mm-hmm.
But something happened, and they were going and exploring what the world was like after the event, and then bringing in this slavery system.
Yeah.
We're all slaves and we don't even know it.
That's right.
Enslaving humanity and the creator in us is what they want, because they're worshiping the other guy.
Yeah.
And what they did was they turned the alchemy alchemy of the original civilization, which was working with the elements and creating for benefit, into the chemistry, modern chemistry, where they were using the poisons
Right.
for, again, to harm us. So the original alchemy, things like mercury and cinnabar and these compounds were used for their healing properties. With
Yeah.
this new stuff coming in, they were using the poisons. They were using mercury in processing clothing and hats.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was all going on around the 1660s. So there's a lot of stuff that pops up around 1666. And Paradise Lost was published in 1667 by James Milton, with the fallen angels as the main characters,
Mm-hmm.
deceiving
Mm-hmm.
Eve and kicking him out of the garden, and
Hmm.
and Satan saying, "Okay, well, I'm gonna mess up God's new favored creation, with us," and did. And you get Moloch and all these characters in there. They're all mentioned by name in Paradise Lost. But 1666 was the year that Newton tossed the apple up.
Oh wow, yeah.
There was a prophet, a false prophet, Sabbatai Zevi. 1666, he was proclaimed Messiah, false
Okay.
Messiah. This is where we get Sabbatean Frankism, which is their yucky, predatory plan thing, for what they're doing to us, Sabbatean Frankism.
Right. Wow.
Communism and,
Yeah.
unfettered migration, just send them all over the place. They wanna destabilize and create chaos.
Yeah, yeah. And you see it happening more and more right now, don't you?
Right, absolutely. And then they call us out, they psychological abuse. "Oh, no, we're not we're not blanking these young girls. That's that's phobia. That's
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Islamophobia. Oh, no, we're not." And everybody knows they are.
It's
I mean,
crazy.
that's, they're creating that dissonance, is a good word, and, that's how they've shoved it down our throats.
Yeah, yeah.
People that are still capable of thinking critically are like, "No, that's but it's called gaslighting, it's psychological abuse,
Absolutely.
and
And
that's how they've endeavored to maintain this, but it's cracking. I mean, it's falling. We're watching it. It's crumbling. And I absolutely believe we're not in this alone, that
oh,
there's
I
things going
agree.
on around us that are going to help us, but people waking up is part of it, because when we withdraw our consent and say no,
Yeah, I agree. There's
that's
power in that.
there is a big power in that.
There is big power. There's magic in this world, and we don't know how
Yeah.
to use it.
And they've used it for ill.
Absolutely.
The original civilization used magic for good, and all of that got
Yeah.
twisted around and turned on its head, kind of like Gulliver in Gulliver's Travels being bound by the Lilliputians. That's
Mhm,
kind of like what I think that's what it was. It was an allegory for
mhm.
what has happened here, because humans were much bigger, and it wasn't that long ago. I mean, you see a lot when you look at it with new eyes, you see these buildings with doors that are
That's
much
right.
bigger than us,
Yeah.
and
Why
windows.
would you build it? Why would you build it
It's
for the
like
size of us?
you wouldn't.
Pointless. No. But the thing is, when you fed a narrative, you protect that narrative. So that's where the cognitive dissonance comes in then. So
Mhm.
if you fed it enough and that becomes you own that narrative then, and people will protect that. And
But
it's very hard for people to break that. You saw it in 2020. It was such an important time for an awakening process because a lot of people you could see the fed a narrative and they would protect that to the hilt. They would disown their families and their friends. They would remove you because that narrative was important to them. And this is why it's important to drip feed this stuff as well, plant the seeds.
and my experience is I've talked to a lot of people that woke up when that
Yeah, yeah.
happened.
Oh, yeah.
I've
There
talked to
was
a
a
lot
lot.
of people that did. All of a
Yeah,
sudden they had time and started
that's
asking
true.
questions.
That's true. They had more time on their hands and the internet was there.
So and you're also talking about academics that have spent their whole lives
Mm,
learning about the official narrative, and books upon books upon books upon books have been written
mm,
that supports what we're taught in school. So I think probably the biggest dissonance would come from there.
mm.
But then I'm aware of people that are architects that started to question,
Me too. Yeah, me too.
um, things like that. So it's like I think it boils down to the individual, but I also think that it doesn't take everybody to wake up. It takes enough people to wake up. And I think
Absolutely.
that causes a shift in our consciousness, because we all have the same consciousness. So that's what critical mass is. You get enough people that wake up and raising that vibration just by waking up. I mean, I've seen the scale, love at the top, love and joy, and fear and shame at the bottom. And I know how hard it is to be up here. Somebody told me that resolve is a high vibration. And I
Hmm.
think, thank goodness. Because believe me, processing all of this is really hard to be loving.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, yeah,
When
yeah.
seeing the enormity of what's happened here and the lies and, it's like, hang 'em.
Well, that's it. You're gonna have an emotional roller coaster, aren't you? You're gonna bring anger into your emotions at some point during
Just
this journey. You must
just to
do.
process it. It's
Yeah,
unavoidable, but the thing is, and challenge for humanity is we've gotta we've gotta get back here. We
absolutely.
gotta
I
go
agree.
from here. So our fall was here from here to here. Now we gotta go back here, and it's not our place to judge. We don't have to like it. We don't have to agree with it. We just have to try to hold a neutral space because we are, I believe, at this stage in our evolutionary journey, we're going back into the unity consciousness that we were already in. And and that's kind of where we are right now because there's so many forces that are like keeping us from that happening. Um and the lies have been so deep that it's like, even for the people waking up, it's still really hard to accept that we've been lied to about everything.
I know. I know. It's wild, isn't it?
There isn't anything in our world that we haven't been lied to about. And so, yeah, you might start waking up here, but you still hold on to
Yeah,
this, that, and the other thing. And
yeah.
organized religion is a big one.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's big brainwashing there, isn't there?
So
I mean,
so
that's
I mentioned
indoctrination.
I mentioned King James, the King James version of the Bible. Well,
Yeah.
guess what? They got into that too. And I again, like with history, I don't think they invented it from scratch. I think they've got real stuff in there and got
Mm.
Old Testament, New Testament, Old World, New World, you know.
Yeah,
Um
yeah.
I think they based it on that, but I think they put in things that they wanted and took
And
out
took
things
things
that they
out.
didn't want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And then you've got the
exactly.
Apocrypha and you've got all, the lost books of the Bible and stuff like that, where they talk
That's
about our
correct.
powers. And
That's
even the
right.
Bible talks about our powers, but that's not the main thing they wanted us to think
Worship.
about.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they want us to look outside of ourselves though, don't they?
Exactly.
We're creator beings, aren't we? Co-creators. That's where as we were, like you say. And it's time to get back to that.
Right. And they've been using our co-creative abilities to create this world that we live in,
Absolutely. Through manipulation
which
and use it. Yeah, exactly. Because that's what we're doing. We're doing it for them through their lives. And like you said, through the TV, the movies, the entertainment, the influencers. We're just fed nonsense constantly.
so we have to navigate through this and grow from it because there's plenty to be upset about and mad about. And mad is not a vibrational state that's going to help us.
No,
And we can't create a different world from the same consciousness that created this world.
correct.
And again, there's so many things I know intellectually that I can't really. I'm not the walking embodiment of bliss and joy. I've got my own issues, my own fears,
Of
but I do
course.
have resolve. I do have resolve to keep putting one foot in front of the other and keep going down this path that the universe laid out for me. And
Yeah,
and I feel like when you have a mission, the universe conspires to help you. And the
definitely.
more you look, the more you get in return.
Definitely. That's you being a creative being, though. You're creating the opportunities that come your way. So the information's coming to you because you are that creator. You were meant to do this work.
I do feel that.
Yeah,
And when I
you are
got
that.
I'm gonna call it a download, but
Yeah.
it was like I got all the information I needed to start doing this probably 2016, 2017.
Okay.
It took me another year to actually start blogging and making videos. And that had to happen synchronistically too, like everything else. I had to be in the
Mm.
right place at the right time with the right people. But that's another thing that tells me that everything is in divine timing. And no matter how
Mm.
bad it looks on the surface, what I'm doing now could not have happened in any other way than the way that it happened.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And let's say by 2016, I got it. It took me another 2 years, but in the in between, I completely moved from where I was living before. I unplugged from the matrix.
Wow, cool.
I left I was working in a hospital setting. I
Yeah.
avoided that completely, the whole 2020 thing. That would have been a nightmare working in a hospital. But
Oh, absolutely.
I extricated myself from that, and I kind of leapt, free fall, but I landed exactly where I needed to be, meeting everybody that I needed to meet in order to be able to start doing this.
That's so good.
And that's part of why my work is kind of unique. It's like this is my journey.
Absolutely.
This is how I came into it. This is how I learned about it. This is the realization I had just a little bit before you did, because I just learned about it when I would go following ley lines and all these other things, or looking at doing the research and going, oh my God,
Mhm.
I need to put that in there, because these are things I didn't know. And one thing about being intuitive is that I know when I'm in it, whether it's
Yeah.
something that's
You'll
important
feel it.
or not. It's like but I have to be in it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't think ahead and say this, that, and the other thing. I have to be in the middle of it to really get it and understand it and see it. And it's led to qualities of my work, that probably do resonate with people, and some of the unique information. In my personal life, it can be an issue sometimes because, I've gotten into bad relationships because I had to be in it to
I
see it.
understand. Yeah, yeah.
It's
I
kind of like a
understand.
double-edged sword.
Yeah.
The intuition is kind of a double-edged sword, because the same aha of my brain that puts two things together can put one fear with another, one event with a fear, and go, and then I can be anxious for days
I totally
because I,
get you. Yeah, yeah.
but it's that same ability to make connections between different things instantaneously that is an important part of the work that I'm doing. Because can I prove what I'm saying? I try. I give as
Mm.
much information as I can. I pack it with information. I have my
You
blog,
certainly do that. Yeah, you
Pierce in the
certainly
Veil
do.
of Illusion.com is my blog. I've got my,
Mm.
at Michelle
It's
Gibson
huge.
8926. Um, and I've been doing this steadily for 7 years now.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of information to go
there is,
through.
and I highly recommend anyone watching this to get in there. But
But that's my what I'm sharing is very relatable
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah, yeah.
people's lives, because it relates to my life too. And it goes through pop culture, it goes through places in your world. I mean, like, you shared with me the landscape zodiac where you live, and I've
Mm,
learned about landscape zodiacs in a presentation on megalithomania, which is one of my guides along the way, where there are these zodiacs in the environment that are built, that were intentionally put there. And Britain has a lot of them.
mm,
I'm sure they're in
yeah,
other places, but it's been really studied there.
yeah.
And so each part of the zodiac has the qualities of that. And then I think this original civilization, we call them Moors, but where it gets confusing is I think there's the same as the tribes of Israel. And
Okay,
I think they were laid out in a geometric pattern and a zodiac pattern.
okay,
So it was completely connected with Earth, was completely connected with heaven.
okay.
And our world, our realm is a star map. And that gets
Wow.
into the things that, the randomness of our history can't even touch, or how everything lines up with what's going on above.
You mentioned that I listened to you, and you mentioned something that something changed with the Philadelphia experiment. Is that a
So,
timeline change? You felt something
s-
went there.
I think it was both a timeline, and I think it was part of the destruction that took place.
Right. Okay.
So that's
Okay.
and I've had that intuitive feeling since I started. Um,
Right.
it information about that came my way several years before I started doing this work, and I just felt, um, so again, this is part of the synchronicities, but um, I was mulling a connection between 1492 and 1942.
Okay.
And then, the whole idea of a figure eight.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so if you look at
Infinity.
those 2 years, the midpoint
Yeah.
year is 1717. There's 450 years in between the 1492 and 1942, and then there's 225 years on either side. And that got confirmed through a psychic friend who could see my guides and relayed the information.
Okay.
Um, but 1717, when I started researching those years, was the year that the Premier Grand Lodge of England was founded. It was also the year that the same lodge adopted the Anna Lucis, where
Right.
4,000 years is added to the calendar. Lucis,
Lucis Trust.
Yeah, same. Lucius, Lucifer, light bearer guy. Um, and then I looked at all the anomalies that came up when I researched those years in between. And so there's 9 50-year periods in between 1492 and 1942, and there were initiatory things that happened every 50 years within the
Okay.
timeline. Things would come up. So 1492, the year the fall of Granada in Spain, was the same year that the grammar for modern Spanish that was published. That's
Right.
just one example, that same year.
Right. Right.
And then, 50 years later, there was a lot of exploration going on by the Spanish in North America, California, and so forth, and Mexico. Um, Again, I'm not sure what happened, what didn't. I'm thinking sometime in the 1700s is when they wrote themselves into the narrative. But one of the interesting things that happened with the psychic friend who was giving me confirmation of this loop, this
Yeah.
figure eight, was she came to see me, and at the time my roommate was a medium,
Okay.
and so she came to see my roommate, and she stopped by and said hi. And I had my chair in the corner of the room, and she said, "Oh, I see your guides. They want me to tell you something." And the first thing they said was, "What you're mulling is correct," which was the time, connection between 1492 1942. And then she said, "On one side of 1742, I'm seeing cold and frozen, and on the other side of 1742, I'm seeing green and sunny
Right.
in Ireland." Showing me Ireland
Okay.
is what she said. So I looked it up. 1742. What happened in Ireland in 1742? And one was Handel's Messiah premiered in Dublin. The other thing that came up was the Great Frost of Ireland, which took place between 1740 and 1741. Well, there's a lot happening in 1740, 1741. So the Habsburg line died out, male line. The renowned house of Europe.
Hmm.
And the 7 Years' War started,
Right.
which was the female Habsburg Empress Marie Therese. And at the end of that time, the Habsburg Empire lost land to the Prussians and all these others. And the Royal Lodge of, or the Irish, I'm sorry, the Royal Order of Scotland was
Okay.
founded in 1741. So that was an advanced Freemason lodge. Showed
Right.
up. That's around that same time. And then the other thing that happened, so with the Great Frost of Ireland happening between 1740, 1741, no known cause, 500,000 people died in Ireland. This is in the historical record. You can find it.
Yeah.
In 1744, Mayor Amschel Rothschild was born,
Uh,
in the founder of the Rothschild international banking family. In 1748, Adam Weishaupt was born, the founder of the Bavarian Order of Illuminati. He was also a Jesuit. And then in 1750, Duke Francis of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld was born, and it was his line that seeded the royal houses of Europe, that replaced the original houses. So that's where we got Victoria and Albert, and they were first cousins from this Duke Francis of this obscure ducal line from Germany. So all that, those guys were all German. Rothschild, Weishaupt, and then Duke Francis.
Yeah.
That's how the Germans ultimately came into the royal house. But who were they?
Mm.
And I think they're reptilian, is my
I
opinion.
was going to say there's no way this can just be human because it's too designed. It's just not going to happen by chance. It's designed.
Yep.
All these figures to be born at this point, to have these changes. That's design.
Yep. So there were revolutions of 1830 in Europe and 1848 that took down some of the original families, but it was basically marriage to this House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha that replaced the original royal houses. And and that's how they got in there. So Duke Francis's children included the parents of Victoria and Albert, I think. And
Right.
then some of his children married, like the House of Braganza in Portugal was not Victoria and Albert, but most of the European royal houses were seeded by Victoria and Albert, who were first cousins. And what's really interesting, if you do the research on Victoria, the hemophilia gene came from her. So again, another bit of information that they're not human. She could not clot.
Interesting.
And that's where the hemophilia gene came from. And that was the downfall of the Russian in our narrative,
Interesting.
was the hemophilia. And then when they were doing their concentration camp experiments, one of the things that they were working on was finding something to help clot with the human experiments.
Wow.
So and then if you look at their coat of arms, there's things in there like, dragons, wyverns, and scaly. Like, if you just look up House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha here. Let me, oops, didn't mean to do that. So let me just go, and I'm just gonna.
Now, poor David Icke has been ripped to pieces since the early 90s for his approach on this subject, and
Actually, it was listening to an interview that he did with somebody on the the royal pedophilia thing, and he was talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And that was years before I started doing my own research. And at that time, I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, but I
Of
don't
course, you
know.
don't want to touch that, would you? You wouldn't want to touch it.
But now, as I've been doing all these years, I'm like, okay, there's something to that. And I think there's really something to that. So I did a
Okay.
complete research on the Ernestine House of Wettin and the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which is the origins of the current British royal family. And they changed the name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor in 1917.
Okay.
Supposedly from, because of the anti-German sentiment from World War I, but they were probably distancing themselves from this close connection. And it's always important to read between the lines when doing any of this research, because except for the ley lines and the architecture and the infrastructure and all the stuff that I do where I can read between the lines, when I go to research, I kind of have to rely to a certain extent on what the narrative says, because that's all you can find. And then I do a lot of comparisons with my work to show how you find the same thing in China that you do in Oklahoma. And Oklahoma was where I woke up to this. So I had examples, and that was one of my first ones. But where I'm going is I want to show you in this coat of arms of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, you've got this tail
Yeah,
in it.
yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
again, I don't have any problems with these people being reptilian. I really don't.
Well, Prince Andrew doesn't sweat apparently. So
So, so I've speculated that the Philadelphia experiment, this naval vessel went back in time and created a rip in the fabric of space-time that
yeah.
caused the Great Frost of Ireland.
Wow.
Um, and I found physical evidence in my research to support that. So I've got
Yeah.
it documented. And then there's actually a movie about a time traveling naval vessel. It was made in 1980 called The Final Countdown, about the USS Nimitz going back to the day before the attack on Pearl Harbor, which was 1941, so that 41 showing up.
Yeah.
So, and they have to tell us, so they tell us in movies and things like that. So I'm not just saying that. I mean, I wouldn't put my name on it if I didn't think there was
Of course. Yeah,
something
yeah.
to it.
Yeah.
And to get to the crazy of the world that we live in today, we're not here on our own. It's not organically.
Well,
Um,
yeah. This world isn't just a 3D world that we're brought up to believe.
so like I said earlier, I mean, you see this picture of James VI on
Oh,
the
wow.
left
Yeah. Wow.
versus what we usually see on the right.
That's mad.
Um, that was his
That's
That
crazy.
was James Francis Edward Stuart, who was forcibly prevented from claiming the throne, and instead the Georgians were brought in. So there's a picture of him on the left that you can find, and there's a picture of him on the right that you can find.
It's just mad that they've been doing this for so long.
And they've got the revolutions. So King Louis Philippe I was placed, I think, in France. And again, you see this whitewashing going on.
Mm,
The left, you see what the
yeah.
typical picture is, and then his skin is getting darker and
Yeah.
darker. And then this photograph of him, it's not the same person,
No.
the darker skin tone. You see it with King Charles III, where you've got a two-tone face going on, like you do here.
Yeah. Gosh.
You've got King Philip II on the left. And what these are all portraits of King Philip II, and typically what we see are the two on the right. But you can
So
find
these guys on the left, then they're Moors, are they?
yeah, they're Moors.
Wow.
You've got Holy Roman Emperor Charles V on the left, and then on the right, he's basically wearing the same outfit, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Except one's black and one's white.
Wow.
But you've got the
That's
same tilt of the
crazy.
head, you've got the same colors going on here. And what they always say about the Habsburgs is that they were like there was something wrong with how they looked with their faces, like anyway, so that's what's said about the Habsburgs. Not that they were Moors, but that there was something wrong with the facial structures.
Okay. Wow.
But the Habsburgs were the most distinguished um, and influential royal houses of Europe. Again, this is what our narrative tells us. And then, so the male line died out in 1740 when Charles VI died. And as a result of the War of Austrian Succession that took place between 1740 and 1748, the Empress Maria Theresa had to concede Habsburg lands in Austria, Spain, and Italy to other powers as part of the terms of the 1740 Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, which also confirmed the right of succession of the German House of Hanover to the British throne. So that's how they got in there. And so I've done a lot of historical narrative research along with
Yeah, yeah.
everything else, because it kind of all roads led there in terms of how they did this. And I've got a lot of information. I don't have all the answers, but I've got a lot of information.
Do you get a lot of scrutiny from historians? Do you get a lot of hassle?
You know, they don't watch my stuff.
There's the cognitive
And
dissonance in full play.
if they do, they blow a gasket,
I
get
bet
mad
you
at
do.
me, and then I never hear from them again. Um, so the son of King Leopold, of this guy, he was the son of Duke Francis. So he was related to the royal house of Britain that became the Windsors, this guy.
Right.
Okay. And so these were Victoria's parents.
Yeah.
So they managed to get Leopold married to Princess Charlotte of Wales, the daughter of King George the Fourth. Okay, so House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha married Charlotte, the Princess of Wales, who died in childbirth.
Right.
Okay, um, and then the Saxe-Coburg Gotha people ended up being the ones that became the direct line. But the reason I want to talk about King Leopold the First here for a second is because of his son, this guy, Leopold the Second,
Hmm.
King of the Belgians from 1865 until 1909. And this guy that I'm pointing at here is absolutely notorious for what happened in the Belgian Congo as a result of the 1884 Berlin Conference under the direction of German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, where Africa was divided up among all the European colonial powers. Nothing is what we've been told. And there's a lot of natural resources in the Congo.
Yeah.
Problems there to this day. And what happened to the Congolese was they had things like their limbs cut off, and millions were killed
My God.
during that time. And they were forced into labor to collect the rubber. They were subjected to extreme violence, um, and their hands were cut off. So
It's.
that happened under this guy who was of this house of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha.
I don't think true human beings, could do things like that, Michelle.
They don't.
It
And
just don't.
that's what. So when I just want to say, when I talk about these things, I have really researched
Yeah, of course.
in
Yeah.
depth into these families and this lineage. And so here's another house of
Oh, yeah.
Saxe-Coburg and Gotha with that tail going through it. And then you really see it with the house of Braganza. Let me see if I can find it. Anyway, that's where these people come from. And it's all of our problems, all of the world's problems come from what's taken place here. I'm going to stop
And
sharing.
then they keep the bloodlines then as well, don't they? That's been a
All right,
big important part of them, to keep the bloodlines in power.
right. And that's why and that's how. And I don't think they're human. I
Mm.
really don't. And I think they've definitely messed up humans. But then
Yeah,
that's where
yeah.
you get into this whole other aspect of what I think happened, which was Aleister Crowley
Mm.
doing
Yeah,
ritual black magic, which anchored in this uh, anti-human agenda, these non-human beings.
yeah.
And you get the whole Baphomet thing going on. So, they parade all of these men as women,
Mm.
and they look like women. There's a something called Free Martin, where they do the gender inversion of the womb. And so you have beautiful looking women that are actually men. So that's demonic.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
What
it's
that is.
wild.
So and then they need children. They want that energy of children, which is one of the things that I learned from the David Icke interview from years ago, where I was first
Mm.
exposed to this, is that pure energy, that pure source energy. So that's what's been going on. And like with everything else, they they overreach, they're arrogant, they wanted the gravy
Hmm.
train to keep going forever. They got pretty far advanced in it. This is worldwide, but they can't maintain their cover anymore. And with people being more awake, they have to tell more lies to try to cover it up, and people see through the lies now.
Mm.
And so, gaslighting works to a certain extent. Controlling the media works probably even better. And the gaslighting in the media. But, they say, no, you didn't see what you saw. No, no. That happens all the time. Don't believe your eyes. Believe what we tell you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's just not working like it used to.
Do you think Aleister Crowley brought in a consciousness then? Do you think he invited, because the timelines were changed with the Philadelphia experiment?
Yes,
Wow.
because he was involved in that.
Oh,
I
right.
learned about that
Okay.
in Peter Moon's book, and that's one of the reasons that stuck in my mind. Peter Moon did a book called Synchronicity of the Seventh Seal that I read
Right.
before I started doing my own work. It's part of my journey.
Right.
And he talked a lot about Aleister Crowley in his books and this occulted timeline and the black magic that was going on. And at the time, I'm like, oh my gosh, it scared me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it planted seeds. And so on the day of the Philadelphia experiment, which would have been in this book, I've heard different days. I've heard July 22nd of 1942, and I've heard this August 12th of 1943. August 12th is the last day of the Lion's Gate, and the Lion's Gate is associated with the portal, the 8-8
The
portal, and
eight.
you
Yeah.
know, the so and
Yeah.
that's what I'm talking about with this
With
timeline.
the eight. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that would, that makes sense to me. And the part of the world, so supposedly Crowley put his son Amato through the circular monolith at Menontoul, and that when he did that, it caused a line of rough energy to go across towards Montauk. So this is all lands in the same area as the Philadelphia experiment. I mean, it's on a ley line, and I found that ley line.
Wow.
And then you've got all kinds of destruction along the way. You've got the Pine Barrens in Long Island and Massachusetts and New Jersey, and then it lands right next to the Philadelphia Naval Yard. So that's some of the physical evidence that I found. But there's also a lot of portal activity there, like interdimensional portals and things like that. So if you're going to send a naval vessel back in time, that would be the place to do it, because um, you had the Montauk Project in that area. You had the Brookhaven National Laboratory. Um, Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower was right in that area. It was next to Brookhaven.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, there's just a lot of stuff that if that's the kind of thing that you want to do, that would be the place to do it. And there's a very tall bell tower that they tell us was built in the early 1900s as a monument to the pilgrims, but it looks like what you see in Italy, in medieval Italy or Renaissance
Mm.
Italy. And it's a granite tower, and when granite rings like a bell. And so one of the thoughts that I've had is that rough energy hit this bell tower, and that when it did that, it caused this dissonant, non-resonant frequency to go through the grid system. And if the Philadelphia experiment went back in time, it's possible that that frequency went back in time,
Get you. Get you. Okay.
and
Right.
that it was that frequency that caused the system to self-destruct. So I think that's one of the causes, but I also think there was also directed energy attacks in other places because I mean, it's all over the earth, the deserts and
Of
all the
course.
devastation. And so I'm thinking there was probably more than one, but that I think that was one of them. And that's part of my unique work, but like I said, I wouldn't say that if I didn't really think there was something to it.
Well, no, of course you wouldn't. Of course you
And
wouldn't. There's too
and
much
then
riding on it.
and then to explain how we got to the crazy upside down inverted world that we live in today,
Mm,
Crowley was all about that.
mm.
Transgender, bisexual,
Barbara Bush, isn't he?
and all of the bad, yeah, and yeah, I think he's Barbara Bush.
Well, Barbara, I mean, you put them side to side, and it's quite unbelievable, the likeness.
Yeah. So again, that's
Wow,
all
wow.
part of the lies that we've been told, and and that's not the only example. I mean, there's other transgendered people that are passed, like I said, and so that crazy stuff would have come from Crowley's influence, and not
Well,
only that, but the horrible things that are happening with children. He was involved in that. But you have to go way off mainstream to start pulling up this other information, like what David Icke talks about.
well, this is the thing, though, isn't it, Michelle? You start talking about stuff like that, or even the fact that dark magic or magic at all could possibly even exist in this world, and people would label you as batshit bonkers because look what they did to David Icke. They ridiculed David Icke so heavily, it was quite unbelievable, the damage that was thrown at him, to the point where when he started speaking out in 2020, he was an easy target then because, oh well, he's a nutter, and he talks about reptilians, so he's a nutter. So nobody wants to touch that.
And I've got another point of correlation. Crowley was from Royal Leamington Spa.
Okay.
That's where the Rosalind Franklin mega COVID lab was,
Was it? Yeah.
in his
Oh.
hometown.
It's like there's so many dots.
Yep.
It's
What are the
it's
chances
wild. It's wild.
that happening randomly? It's like, you have to look, you have to read between the lines, and you have to look for those little details, because that's the patterns are where you find it, because the truth has been removed, and no, they don't want it. They don't want it to stop. They have a mission. They want to take over, and they got far into it.
Well, they're
But they
disconnecting us
knew it.
even further, Michelle, aren't they? The transhumanism agenda is
Yep,
purely designed to disconnect us further from the earth and source. So, what is it about the ley lines that's important for humanity then? Because there's obviously something important there,
everything, everything.
right?
When I started learning about all this stuff over the years, so I want to say this is before I started doing my own research. I had my
Yeah.
aha. It's like, got my direction. Got my marching orders. I got to do this. But the idea that the ley lines are consciousness,
Okay.
so it's like our group soul, but it's also this electromagnetic energy, that these grids are how we're connected to all there is. And the ancients knew this. They knew where they were. They knew what they were doing. Everything, like I said, everything worked perfectly. We were at our highest expression, and they've been working on getting us to our very lowest.
Hmm.
And it's, I call it level of Beavis and Butthead. That's
Yeah,
their perfect
right.
humanity.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Well, we're easy controlled that way.
So we were at a high level of vibration. They've been wiping the ones that survive, so there was whatever happened originally would have wiped out a substantial portion of the human population that did their own experimentation, and like the island of Dr. Moreau, they're, like creating a new humanity that's much smaller. We're still source. I mean, we're still special, or they wouldn't be going through all this trouble, but we're much smaller. We've
Hmm.
had our DNA disconnected, so we're not going on all
Hmm.
cylinders, and lied to about everything. So we don't know up from down in this place.
Hmm.
And so they've been tinkering with everything, with our genetics. And um So they've done everything that they could think of doing to keep us from waking up. And like you said, transhumanism is their goal, but I think more than that, they're parasites, so they have to have an artificial or synthetic source energy, which is what
Mm.
we think you don't have it artificially, so we're going to use the real ones until we can create our own. And they've, like I said, they have targeted the higher consciousness people, and melanin is a superconductor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you look up, I mean, melanin is pretty pricey. Um, let's see what the price of it is. So this
Yeah.
is, this is part of the lie, is this creating all of this division between race and religion to keep us fighting each other. Let me see.
Yeah.
Today.
They wouldn't go to this much trouble if we weren't important.
Right, exactly. That's exactly why they've done it. They had to do it this way. Um, is melanin worth more than gold? So despite all that, today melanin is worth over $445 a gram.
I think we're seeing a different screen on here.
Let me see. Oh, yeah, so that's my, oh, let me see. I got it. I think I know why. Hang on. Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing for a sec.
That's okay.
That's why. Okay. I'm going to present again. Let's do this again. I just want to show you that this has been a pretty elaborate deception,
Yeah.
especially with turning the creators into slaves, the most visible slave. So 2024 price of melanin is $750 a gram.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's
Let's
crazy.
see, it's cost between 450 and 1,150 per gram.
Oh my goodness.
And they target Black people for that reason.
Wow. Oh
They
my
especially
God.
want them to harvest them.
Oh my God. That's unbelievable. Whoa. This world is insane. Well,
And
actually, it's not this world, it's the people controlling it. They're the insane ones.
and they are.
And they're
And they
just the
don't have what we have.
controllers.
They don't have what we have, and and they'll never have what we have. So they're trying to create a new human that is our worst possible.
Yeah, because they can't create, though. They can only manipulate us. They can't create. We're the creators. So once we recognize and realize who we are properly, it'll be game over then.
Right.
Now, if Aleister Crowley can do what he did, surely it can be done in reverse then.
Yeah, and I think that's getting into the spiritual awakening that's happening right now. Like I said, that
Mm,
I know my work does reach people that have their own spiritual gifts. That it's like, okay, now it's time, and they're
yeah.
doing things like frequency healing, tuning
Mm,
forks, things like that. Seeing auras and seeing energy. I've met some incredible people. Those aren't my
yeah.
gifts, but
Yeah. Well,
I've been a part of
your
their journey.
gift, absolutely. Your
And
gift is vital right now.
and so I know for me personally, I could not have this level of awareness and not do what I'm doing.
Mm,
And that's why I don't see an end in sight. People need to know that they have a choice. And instead of responding to the lies in the same way, which are intended to create division between our brothers and sisters, all of them,
mm,
we're all brothers, we're all part of the same being. It's
mm-hmm.
like in your body, cancer is when your cells fight each other, and we're doing the same thing. We're cells of one body.
Yeah,
And when we're at odds with each other, distrusting, suspicious, inebriated, drugged, we're at such a low level of consciousness that we're
absolutely.
only helping them. and that's why they did it in the first place. So, like I said, it doesn't take all of us, but it takes enough of us to wake up and to start choosing
Tipping the
differently
balance.
and reacting differently. And,
Mm,
maybe not everybody's called to be a blogger or YouTuber, but some are.
mm,
I know
mm.
a lot of people have started their own channels, doing their own research, um, but there are other ways too. And I mean, I'm not going to be a person that's going to go down with a sign and be an activist that way. Um, but I can do what I do here.
Mm,
I can do this until the cows come home. There's no
mm.
problem. I can do this. It's easy, actually, but that fits my personality and
It's
what I
your
can.
role, isn't it?
Because I'm not a confrontational person in real life, in my everyday life, but I say things and do things with my blog, and which I turn into videos that need to be said. And somehow,
Absolutely.
some way, I've flown under the radar with the forces that would try to stop it. And
Well, it's getting out there. It's
it's,
getting
yeah,
out there, and that's it. It's so important.
so I'm still here. I'm still up. I still have my platform, and
I,
I'll keep doing it.
I said to my missus the other day, Michelle, I said we should be having Michelle Gibson schools. That's what we need all over the place. Teaching the kids what's going on so they know don't read those textbooks. You want to watch these programs here, you know. Can I ask you, I mean, you mentioned it earlier about fires. The great fires were happening everywhere, weren't they?
Everywhere.
I mean, it doesn't make sense, does it? I mean, why would there be these great fires? If you think about it, why would that happen?
Two reasons. One is destroying what was there,
Yeah,
and the other is they needed to say, "We built this back better."
exactly. It just isn't going to
That's
happen, is it? Unless it's
the reason.
designed to happen.
And the
And
same thing with
all,
floods, great floods everywhere. So if you
yeah.
keep in mind that this was a very advanced hydrologically civilization with canals. Like I said, I don't think the
Mm,
world looked like it does today. I think large portions of landmass just sank.
hmm.
And I think you said you watched the Great Pyramid, uh, the alignment between Giza
Yeah.
and Teotihuacan in Mexico, and all the stuff along the way that is exactly the same. But along the coast, you've got the same thing in France that you do in on the Atlantic coast. The exact same manifestations of wetlands and deserts and or dunes and marshlands and canals and lighthouses, and I think the land sank when the grid was destroyed where those places were, that they were
Mm,
part of the grid. And so there's two aspects to that. One is that the pyramids were an important part of the system, pyramid-based system, and that the when it was destroyed, the controllers reverse engineered it to keep lowering our consciousness. So you find stores, all manner of stores, um, racing circuits. So I think what are racing circuits today, and we could talk about motocross, motorcycle, auto racing, horse racing, those tracks were originally part of the grid. They were circuits on the grid
right.
system. And so they're
Okay.
harvesting that energy. They're also growing their GMO crops on these ley lines.
Wow.
So they're using that energy. They're also putting chemical plants and there's nuclear, I think nuclear energy was pre-existing too, but I found nuclear plants in wetlands. So why are you going to build your nuclear plant in a marsh? I think it was already there. And again,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just compiling the evidence, and I like people to come to their own conclusions. I mean, besides my brain hurting from doing all the research, I try to connect the dots, but I'm hoping there's enough information in there for people to be able to see
But
what
at
I'm
least
trying to
question
say
it. Yeah,
and question
yeah.
it. But I'm like in that example, I did pull precise comparisons of what you find in Europe and what you find in North America on that along that alignment between Giza and Teotihuacan.
It's it's why I mentioned when I emailed you about we live near a little town called Leyland, and it's sort of, well, there must be a ley line running through, and I think it's parallel to Leyland, and there's a little town near us as well called, or it's a small city called Preston in Lancashire, and there's this, but on these housing estates, there's a negative society. You know, it's not their fault. It's just the way it's been
Right.
placed, and you can tell it's downbeat. It's designed that way, and if it's sat on a ley line, that's the reason, isn't it? To keep that energy harnessed.
It's absolutely planned that way.
Mm.
It's how they keep the consciousness down, or
God.
especially powerful places, or doing false flags on ley lines,
Wow. Yeah.
or
Of course.
wars,
Yeah.
battles. They've been manipulating the ley lines like crazy in our narrative. And they've kept it from us, so we wouldn't know anything about it. They took them off maps. They took the ley lines that were originally on maps, and
Yeah.
all we have are longitude and latitude, which were probably part of the original maps, but so were ley lines. If you look up the Catalan Atlas, said to be from like 1365, it shows the ley lines. And there's something missing, like Catalonia, which is southern France, southern
Hmm.
Spain, and then the
Yeah.
Balearic Islands.
Yeah.
And I think there was land there. It's like the Mediterranean Sea. Mediterranean means Middle Earth. I think there was land there.
Ah. Right.
That's sank.
Interesting.
And
Oh.
the information, you can find it, but it takes a lot of digging because that's not what we're told. And the whole Napoleon thing, Napoleon was part of the reset, the Napoleonic Wars, and Rothschild shows up in the mid to late 1700s, and their fortune was made on the Napoleonic Wars. But it's more than that. It's like whatever he was doing was part of the cover up
Hmm.
of history. And he was a Freemason. I mean, we all remember him with his hand stuck in his jacket.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Before we
Yeah.
knew what that meant, a hidden hand,
Hmm.
signifying the second veil in Freemasonry. But that's one of the easiest ways to identify whether or not somebody's a Freemason. And so they were highly involved. The Freemasons were highly involved in this, and so were the Jesuits. And then
Yeah.
other secret societies, the Oddfellows were, the Elks were, um,
So what where
others,
does Rome come into this, Michelle? Then, because I mean, the Roman
Rome,
Empire obviously is.
the orders, the Catholic orders. So there's the Jesuits, there's the Franciscans, there's all of
Yeah.
these nuns. They were all part of it too. So a lot of bad things happening in Catholic schools and things like that. That whole thing in Ireland with finding the babies in the septic tank, it's been like, it was on my social media feed like within the last couple of days, like 700 to 800 bodies in a septic tank on property. Um, the boarding schools, the Indian residential schools, the Aboriginal in Australia. I mean, all of it. It was bad, bad, bad.
And you notice as well, I noticed especially again going back to 2020, where they seem to be attacking indigenous people. This seems to be a common theme as well, doesn't it? You know, they were going for the Aborigines and the Maoris, and they were really trying to get them injected with this medical intervention and causing all sorts of chaos. It's
And they're the builders, and that's the biggest lie of all. They stole their legacy, and then they trashed them, and they gave them this new identity of being hunter-gatherers and primitive, and said,
mm,
we built all these beautiful Greco-looking buildings in Sydney and wherever else, or in the United States. We built and it doesn't hold up. And that's, again, the internet. We can do our own research now and look at these things and look at the stories they tell and say that's ridiculous. They're saying they built this around the time of the Civil War in America, and how, what technology, because at the same time we're low tech. And yet we're
Mm,
building like the ancient Romans and the Greeks were supposed to have been building. And again, I think they were Moors too. It was all part of the
right.
same civilization, but they got completely removed. And now I've got this hard sell of saying it was the Moors. It was all the Moors when we've been given this false historical narrative that's attributed everything differently.
I remember as a kid growing up, Michelle, thinking, how is it possible that they, speaking of technology and buildings that were made and things like that, like how would the pyramids be built? With slaves, for example. I mean, how is that possible? How did they move the stones from Wales, I think it was, for Stonehenge? How is that even possible? It can't. It's just, and why as well? It's there's the reasons we never told.
And I think that's a really good point because they had technologies, they had building technologies we can't even imagine.
Mm,
I mean, if they could tune in to like a bluestone, it's the right frequency, they could levitate it,
yeah, yeah,
move it that
exactly.
way. And then
Yeah,
you've got the Moors in the United Kingdom. They're in Ireland, they're in Scotland, they're in all over the UK. They're called the Moors and they're covered with stones. So
right.
they're keeping the memory of the people in the name. Going, going ha ha ha. But it's
Wow.
just a word. It's just a word in English. It's a moor. It's, poor
Of
land,
course.
poor rocky land with heather growing on it.
I
But you
can't
look at the
believe it.
moors and they're
Wow.
megaliths.
An American way in London, like stick to the road, stay off the moors. That's what he kept saying. Oh my God. It's all
So
spell casting.
it's like it is. That's what they've been doing. That's what the word spell in
Yeah,
English to
yeah,
spell.
exactly.
Grimoire is the root of or grammar. Grammar and grimoire are the same.
Wow. Oh
That's what they've
my
been doing.
goodness me. And
They've been tricking you.
speaking of buildings and how amazing buildings used to be, because they're shit now. Whatever they're putting up there now is just nothing. These expositions that just they put them up and then dismantle them or they burn down or whatever. I mean, seriously, are we supposed to just believe that? I remember as a kid seeing footage, and I think I found it on YouTube a while ago. I think it was Paris, early 1900s Paris, and the pavements were moving. There were people like stood on the pavements as they were moving along. This technology that it's like, what is what is that? And then you talk to people about it, think you're mad.
Yeah.
I remember seeing it.
There was I would say about a 40-year period, and I referenced this when I first started talking, about 1880 to about 1920, when things were far more advanced. The
Hmm.
things that people had access to because they were bringing them online,
Hmm.
and then they went away. We don't have them anymore, and nobody questions it.
No, they don't.
There were streetcars all over the earth. There were streetcars in the middle of the
Wow.
Amazon jungle in Manaus in Brazil, and you can see pictures of them. But they're like, "Oh no, we built that." It's like, right, how? There's no road there. There was no road there when they were said to have built it. The only road there now is like terrible. Like 6 months out of the year, it's muddy from the rains. The stories
I,
do not make any sense if you
and like
apply critical thinking.
and you mentioned earlier on airships as well,
Mhm.
things like that.
You've got the tower. I want to say it's Black
Blackpool,
Blackpool Tower.
Blackpool. Yeah.
Um, and then there was another tower. I think one exists and one doesn't. But fires associated with like the Beatles were at a ballroom at one
Hmm.
of those places.
Yeah, Blackpool Ballroom is, yeah.
I mean, and they're
Yeah,
they were part of it. Tavistock and Crowley was part of
of,
Tavistock.
of course, of course. And interestingly, Michelle, Blackpool's not far from where I live. It's so unbelievably negative, Blackpool. It's like Pinocchio, the story Pinocchio, where he's taken to the fairground and things like that, and he's been, manipulated by the bad guys to smoke a cigarette or whatever, and to be a real boy. Blackpool is full of fun, but it's full of darkness, and you can go there and you can feel the energy. If you are sensitive to energy, you will feel it. You will have hen and stag parties, drunk and disorderly, drugs by the whatever, fighting going on. It's all alcohol. It's affairs will be happening everywhere. It's so negative, but there'll be a reason for it. There will be a reason.
And Blackpool's a good example because that was said to be a replica of the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
There's replicas of the Eiffel Tower all over the earth, just like there's replicas of the Statue of Liberty all over the earth. It's BS.
Yeah.
That's part of their story to explain these things. And then there were towers all over Britain that I've read about. I even think Wembley had one.
Right.
That they're gone. So they dismantled a lot of it. I'm sure they're still using the grid.
Yeah, well, Wembley Stadium had twin towers, and they knocked Wembley Stadium down and rebuilt it and had an arch instead. And then I remember when I first started waking up back in 2012, I come across a guy called Rick Clay, and he had a radio interview. I'll send you the link to it because you might find it interesting, because he talks a lot about the Olympic area where they were building for the Olympics, and it was mind blowing. Everything was laid out for energy harvesting.
And the Olympics are on these ley lines, on major ley lines. So yeah, they're harvesting the energy. It's not what we're told.
Yeah.
And if you look at I think it's the Coliseum in Los Angeles, and this is where the Olympics were. I want to say it's in the 30s, but this is off the top of my head, because what I'm remembering, they've got these two bizarre statues, one a female body and the other a male body, but they have no head and they have no feet.
Okay.
And I've done some work on creepy public art, and I would put that right in there, creepy public art. So like around the Marble Arch, they have the displays in London. Somebody brought those to my attention. Just really weird art. And some of that artwork is like buried giants, which I think is what happened. I think they're telling us with this stuff. If they have to tell us, and if people interact with it or walk around it in these public displays and don't complain,
We're
that's on
consenting.
us.
Yeah, we're consenting to it. That's exactly how they play the game, though, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
They
exactly.
tell us. That's how they play it in the film. So they'll tell us what they're going to do, or they've done it, and it's their karmic way out, isn't it? Because we consent.
That's how they think. Now,
Yeah,
whether or
sure.
not it does, that's been their get out of jail free card in their own mind. And again, if they've always known it wasn't going to work. I've always heard that they knew this could not be stopped, but they've tried, and they've given it a good try. We have to give them that.
Oh,
They got
yeah,
pretty far into this,
definitely.
but they've known that it wasn't going to work. And so that's why it's been so bad for us in everything. Even like you'd think charities would be above it. They're not. Charities are part of
No.
it.
Yeah, they're definitely part of it.
YMCA and
Definitely part of it.
Salvation Army and Red Cross and
Oh,
Anti-Slavery
the big
International.
ones. Yeah,
They're
the
all
big ones
part
are
of it.
corrupt. It's all corrupt.
But within those, now this is something that I found as a volunteer. I was involved in Kiwanis, the community service, and that's part of it too. It came from the same era, but good things do come out of it. So even though they were formed by these people involved in this crap with a particular function, I'm sure good things do come out of it. I mean, we haven't been deserted by the Creator. It's still there. God is still with us.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there were people that did not have a good experience. That whatever real purpose they had, whether it was trafficking or God knows what else, um, energy harvesting. But I like when I was a volunteer for Kiwanis, good things did come out of that.
Mm.
People
Mm.
just coming together because they like being together and helping their community and helping people. I
Of
know that's why I was
course.
with it. I enjoyed that, and I was good using my skills as a leader in Kiwanis and things like that. But Kiwanis, Rotary, Lions, they were all from the same era, the early
Mm.
1900s.
Mm.
Um, YMCA came about in 1844. Sketchy stuff. I want to say George Wilson or something like that. It was a draper. The drapers are up in this because they've been using clothing. So they got
Mm-hmm.
rid of the good stuff, the silks and all that stuff, and they replaced it with
Mm-hmm.
cotton
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and nylon and synthetic fabrics and
Mm.
dyes, and you put the poisons and all of that stuff. And then you enslave people at these mills and these shops, workhouses, making clothes. So they got a lot of mileage out of what we wear. But a lot going on. Again, in 1840s, there was a lot happening with
It's
the system that we live in
fascinating.
today.
It's so fascinating. Do you think they've rushing it lately? Do you think because there's a reset? It seems to be a reset. They've talked about it, haven't they? They're not soft in saying the Great Reset. Do you think something?
I think they're rushing it. I agree. I don't think
Yeah.
it was supposed to. We weren't ever supposed to know what hit us, ever, ever, ever. And I think they were forced to speed it up, and that's why we're seeing a lot of the things that we're seeing that we wouldn't otherwise have seen.
Mm.
Again, it takes the people that haven't been completely mind controlled and brainwashed.
Yeah.
Most people are pretty normal, not the extreme with the gender ideology and all that stuff. Most people aren't like that. We're trying to live our lives, if we have a family, raise our kids,
Yeah.
have a job, pay for, reasonable things to have a comfortable life. That's what most people want.
Absolutely.
And then when they put the cheap TG clothing displays in stores and have TG spokespeople for beer and things like that, that's when the average person says, "Hell no, that's not what I signed up for." And that's one of the places where they're showing their hand because they're trying to force this down people
Yeah.
before people are, it's like, no, no, you know. Um, so that's part of it. It's like, okay, it wasn't supposed to. They wanted to have us so beaten down that we would accept whatever,
Of course.
and
And
that
most
and
most do.
we're not
But
that far gone.
no. Well, we're not. We're rising back up. I'm convinced that consciousness is rising, and it's on its way up. I'm convinced of it. The conversations I have, there's more and more of it. People are seeing things, asking questions, breaking the spell. The veil's lifting. It's not quick, but it's not going to be. I think if it was too quick, I think people's brains would explode anyway. I don't think they'd be able to handle it.
And this hasn't happened fast enough for me, but I've been awake for a long time, and I think that's the
Well, that's
reason
it.
why, is because it would be too
Yeah,
much for the average person to
yeah, yeah,
handle.
yeah. Yeah, it'd be far too much. Can I ask you, in your research, what is it about the Middle East that's so important? Because there's always the conflict going on there. We're seeing it right now. Is there something? Is there a reason for that area?
Well, it would have all been part of the same civilization,
Hmm.
um, and then the Rothschilds with the Balfour Declaration around the time of the World War One, and then them getting the state of Israel. Well, they're not
Hmm.
the real Jews. They're the
No.
satanic Jews,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
synagogue of Satan. And so the real Israelites would be these people, these original people
Mm.
that were laid out, like I said earlier, the 12 tribes, the 12 zodiac. Everything was laid out perfectly, geometrically, and between heaven and earth. So they were functioning at a very high level. And so there were a lot of identities that were taken by these controllers to say we're the chosen ones, you know, and
Yeah.
create this conflict in this land of theirs
Mm.
that was purchased starting in the 1830s by the Rothschilds that would become Israel. And then the day that I think it was the day that the United States recognized the state of Israel was when the war started between the Palestinians and the people that were there and the Egyptians.
Right.
The very day was when
Wow.
that conflict started. So that's all been part of this agenda. Um, Everything we're seeing is part of this agenda because the
And
original
what's
people knew who they were. And when you start really digging down, so the controllers want to put a mask on us so we don't
hmm
see it. So we get
hmm
Halloween and these carnivals with masks and everything. The
hmm
original people were trying to connect with their higher selves. And
That's
so they
right.
didn't cover their face. They had feathers and things like that. The feathered serpent, the kundalini rising,
Yeah.
connecting in the pineal gland, crown opening up. That's what the original people were doing. And the controllers come in with this whole narrative where they're trying to put masks on us. We don't know who we really are. Just really elevating that whole idea in the narrative and in our celebrations. I haven't been able to stand Halloween ever. I don't like Halloween. Now I know why, but I'd never cared for it. I mean, why
Yeah.
are we glorifying vampires and werewolves and
hmm All
that's
by design, isn't it? It's all by design.
um so that's all been foisted on us. And originally we were working on individually and collectively connecting with
Yeah.
our soul essence, our higher self, our I am presence. And that's not the kind of human that the controllers particularly want to have around.
No, they don't, but they've no choice because it's happening.
Mhm.
And it's coming back, you know. I'm like I say, I'm convinced of it. Convinced of it.
I
I
am
think they're
too.
rushing it. They're rushing it. They're not going to get away with it,
Yeah,
and it's going to go. It's going to go back to the way it should be at some
100% agree
point.
with you. There's in my mind there is no way I can even contemplate that they're going to get away with this
Mm,
and win. I just don't see that. I don't know what it's going to look like exactly, but
mm,
but what they've done at the level of awareness that I've have just following these ley lines and seeing everything that's happened, it's like they have been committing crimes essentially with impunity for a very long time. They've gotten away with it for whatever, however they rigged the system, and they're not going to be able to get away with it for very much longer. It's already coming down.
I agree. I agree completely. Is there anything that you've come across over the years of your research that still gives you goosebumps in terms of you still can't believe you came across that kind of information? It's like, oh, wow. I mean,
Lots, and I can't pull anything off the top of my head, but
I
just
bet
a
there
lot of
is.
information. It's like wow. Um,
What was it like when you were telling people initially? Were people going, "Ah, shut up, Michelle"?
nobody that I know personally. I can really talk about this, so it's
No,
all
I
been
bet.
in my cyber community.
Yeah,
My family's not there. I have
yeah,
a cousin. I have actually one cousin on my dad's side and one cousin on my mom's side that are more awake than the others.
yeah.
And then everybody else is sound asleep and poster kids for Operation Mockingbird. Believe everything they've ever been told about everything. So I don't talk to them about it. And then in my day-to-day life where I live, because I live quite a ways from my family,
Mhm.
2 people
Two
that I could
people.
actually talk to about this.
It's a lonely path, the awakening path, isn't it? I have these conversations with people, and I went. We had a pub during. the mad season in 2020. We actually signed for the pub the day they shut the pubs in the UK. We signed for it. So we were there to open the doors. We weren't there to run a business. We lost everything, right, Michelle? But it was about having people come in that were waking up. So we were having these conversations. It was a hub for people that needed to be with other people. You know what I mean? So these things are happening everywhere. And now I'm trying to do that virtually, you know, and if things get rough, we've got a space, a safe space, you know, because I think that's important, because it is a lonely journey.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I haven't had to work outside the home. I got a VA pension in 2018, and then because my husband's death was service connected, which we didn't know at the time. It came 18 years after the fact, but it came. And
Wow.
then I'm going to be drawing Social Security here. But I've been able to manage without having to work outside, and it would be very hard for me to do that. Being in this in between space, I love people, I love working, but with all of the dissonant attitudes and opinions out there, it's just it would
It's
drain me
hard.
very quickly.
It's
And
hard. I've tried, Michelle, since we lost the pub. I've tried. I've had 2 jobs and I've struggled. I've struggled because it's like, what do I talk about?
yeah,
It's really tough.
yeah. I mean, I can small talk, but it's not very satisfying.
It's not. You
You
want
feel
your
like,
soul fulfilled, don't you? We've got stuff to do. Can you not see what's going on?
but I
Lots
have
of,
been provided for by the universe, so, it's like they got my back apparently.
yeah, I'm sure that you will have what's needed to do your work.
Yeah,
I think
the
that's
VA
that's
pension
the
was a
minimum.
big one, and that was, I didn't even know about it, and that was another being in the right place at the right time.
Good. Well, that's really good. That's really good. So what you doing now then? Are you still diving in? Are you still finding new stuff or
Every day,
every
every
day?
day. Yeah, I'm doing research of the Great Lakes right now, and
Oh yeah.
uh, uh,
Oh, I've got to hear more of this.
because there's certain
Oh,
places that you can really see it. So the Great Lakes would be one. I did a
okay.
whole thing on Appalachia.
Oh,
It's came out really easily there.
yeah.
Um, basically that whole idea that they took the system down, the free energy generating system, so they needed to find the replacements, fell out there, and it is in the Great Lakes. So these creatures come in, they start mining for coal, they start chopping down all the trees, and I mean all the trees, turning them into lumber,
Hmm.
starting these factories. The Industrial Revolution in Britain, and the same mill system was set up in America, where you get people with no other choice. They have to work in the mill to live with
Hmm.
barely living. They weren't even getting a living wage. It's wage slavery.
Absolutely.
And so controlling every aspect of their lives. And that's what they've always wanted. That's what they want now. They want to control every aspect of our lives. And if they can't control us, they don't want us to
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah. 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 And if they can get people wearing these metaverse headset masks and disappearing into a different virtual world, then they're happy with that, aren't they? They'll just give people universal basic income. Just do as you're told, behave. You'll have enough to get by, and we'll just keep harvesting your energy.
Yeah. And they started that process a long time ago, even with the arcade games, the pinball machines, and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
sure.
That's all part of it, conditioning people to live in a
Absolutely.
virtual reality. Movies, television, that's all what that is.
Yeah, of
And
course
then
it
they
is.
they've
That
just refined their, meta and all that stuff to get people that's all they do. It's like it's that addictive part of our personalities where we get
it's
into
the
this stuff and
dopamine.
we can't get out.
Yeah, we go for the dopamine hits, don't we? We go for the likes on our social media. We're flicking through things, we're scrolling, we're doom scrolling, we're constantly being distracted from ourselves. to finding ourselves truly and spending time. And I'm as guilty as anyone. I'm not perfect, I
Absolutely.
recognize
Not
it, but
either.
I'm doing it. It's they got us in that respect, but we've got to get out of it as best we can.
Right. And as far as they're concerned, the younger the better. And that's with
Oh
everything
yeah,
we're seeing.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
but the games, and then you get into the grooming problem, and then the gender ideology and all that stuff
I
they're
know
pushing
all
on
of that.
the youngest of the young. So we just happen to be in a living in a time when the curtain's being pulled back and they're not doing it in darkness anymore.
Do you
We
think
can see what they're doing.
before we close off, do you think when they have the resets, because there's resets of there's knowledge of, say, Cabbage Patch Babies or and the orphans and all that kind of thing. Have they wiped out adults because they've come to knowledge, or they're waking up, and therefore let's get rid of them quickly? Or uh,
I think it was a combination. I mean, I think the reset that I am aware of, because I don't see cyclical resets. I know other
okay,
people are talking about that. I see a long, highly advanced civilization that got wiped out and
oh, I
one
see.
massive reset. So that's kind of
Okay.
my working hypothesis. But I think there were survivors. So, I talked about there's public art where there's like giant heads
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah.
being displayed, or giants in the earth, or giants trying to break free from the earth. I think they're
Yeah.
right underneath us. And giants show up in construction sites, when they're drilling, looking for oil. When they're digging for roads, they find giants.
Mm-hmm.
This happened a lot in the 19th century, and they had them in newspaper articles. And today we've got checkers telling us it's false. It's
Of
not.
course.
So I think they were buried. A lot of them were buried, and but there's also underground infrastructure. So a lot of them could have survived underground. And I think a lot of what we're told, like in the United States, I think the Civil War was about this original civilization and maybe hunting people
Um,
down that were survivors
yeah.
from it. And that may be other wars as well. I mean, in the Holocaust in Europe, who were they actually killing?
Mm,
You know, were the
mm,
were the Ger- you know were the Ashkenazis killing their own, or
mm.
were they killing
I
original
know.
people? I don't know. I'm not saying I have an answer for that, but I mean, there's what we haven't been told the truth. So
No, we know that much, don't we?
figure it out.
Mm,
Who were they burning? Why were they burning them? Why were they gassing? And what was going on? So, because they sure as hell covered this civilization up and the people. And so anyway, they were repopulating, and that's where you get into the orphan trains and the infantoriums and the Cabbage Patch Kids and all that other stuff. They were repopulating, and then they were sending them out. And I think some of it was probably for workforce, and I think that was early child trafficking too.
yeah,
'Cause they're
sure.
doing
Because
the
they'd have
same
the
thing
kids.
now. I mean, and you
Yeah,
hear about it, these companies like Walmart and Wayfair and
yeah,
Balenciaga
I know.
that are
Yeah,
they advertise this bag for, like, thousands of
I
dollars,
know. I know. It's insane, isn't it?
and they're
It's
kids.
insane.
So that I think it was the same kind of thing, because when you look into the orphan trains, they would go they would be organized at, like, the local theater or whatever, and they would be eye color and, come
See,
and pick your kid. No
there's your
oversight.
Pinocchio story again.
Right, and they're doing the same thing with these mail order,
It's just,
people where people can request eye colors and things like that. So this is the
well,
same,
that's it.
feeding these same non-humans that need this energy.
That's it. And you get a child, you get them, for 7 years, and you can educate them and brainwash them enough, and it's going to be tough for them to break that narrative, then, isn't it? It's,
Yeah,
they keep them as fast asleep as possible.
right. So that's what's going on underneath the surface of normalcy, that we think we're living in a world that's okay.
Hmm. Well, we know different, Michelle.
And
We
I
know
don't go
different.
into a lot of the stuff in the type of work that I do. I'm aware of it. But my primary drive is to recover this lost history, this missing history, the architecture, the infrastructure, the stories they tell us about it, what looks like happened here. That's my main focus. But all this other stuff, I'm very aware of.
And you do a brilliant job at it, Michelle, and it's I'm very grateful for the work that you do on a personal level, and I'm sure many, many others are. And I know a lot of people that are aware that I'm speaking to you tonight are excited that this is going to be coming out. So, for those that don't know you, where can they find you? It's a good spot for them, and I obviously will put that in the show notes anyway. But
Yep. So my website is piercingtheveilofellusion.com, and that's where my blog is. And then I turn all of my blog posts into videos, and at Michelle Gibson 8946 on YouTube. Those are two main places. I do have Patreon and a couple of ebooks and things like that. But if people are interested in finding out more about my work, those are the two best places to go.
Michelle, you're absolutely brilliant. You've took me to school today, so I needed that.
It sounds like you know a lot already.
Only because I've been watching your stuff. But you do such amazing work, like I say, and I'm so grateful. And thank you for coming on the show. I hope we can do this again. And keep doing it. Please keep doing it. Keep doing it.
Yeah, just let me know, and if there's a particular topic that you'd like me to go over, I can. It's just kind of more of a general introduction today, but I've got
Oh, don't tempt me.
all different kinds of things to share.
Oh well, I'm going to be making a list now, Michelle. You'll be emailed in the morning.
Please do.
Right, you take care, Michelle. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Matt. Thank you for the invitation. Really glad to talk to you today.